Lyle, 32, has been in the center of a family drama I never wanted but cannot seem to avoid. To set the scene, everything started with the unplanned and abrupt death of my parents. Both practically and emotionally, it was a difficult period. After the dust settled, I took over the family house. Nobody found this shocking. My parents had been quite clear in their will. While my younger sister, Isabella, 29F, had been living in another city, totally involved in her glitzy lifestyle, I had been the one looking after them in their last years, managing their appointments, making sure they were comfortable, and postponing my life to help them. Isabella was always the golden child growing up. Her was much loved by our parents. She was the one complimented for everything, no matter how little. I kept in the background, the dependable but invisible sibling. I have at least thought I had made peace with that. The will was clear. Isabella received her fair share of assets, while I got the house. But when my parents passed away, Isabella's real colors emerged in ways I wasn't ready for. Given the situation, it was logical, and to be honest, nobody found it surprising. But a few months later, Isabella called. She would have faced a financial and otherwise tough patch. Finally caught up with her were too many costly dinners, luxury shopping sprees, and a lifestyle she could not maintain. I didn't want to say yes when she asked whether she might move in, just for a little bit, until she got back on her feet. It didn't set well with me anything about it, but I wasn't merciless. In all respects, she was my sister. I reasoned it would be just temporary. That was my first error. She seems to have concluded the house belonged to her when Isabella moved in. She invaded her way in, not easing into life there. She had rearranged the living room, replaced some of my furniture with items she purchased online, and even moved some of my stuff into storage without asking me within the first week. When I asked her about it, she would shrug as if it were no great problem. I had come home from work to see new decor I hadn't chosen. Things grew worse. Isabella began regularly bringing guests over, hosting spontaneous celebrations, and treating the house as her personal social center. Whether I wanted to rest or was tired from work, there were always people in the living room drinking and joking like they owned the house. She never asked whether I was comfortable with it or gave me a heads up, but her attitude toward the house itself truly sent me over the brink. She started hinting that we should share the house since we're family. She said things like, "It's only fair that we both have say in what happens here." And she referred to the house as ours instead of mine. It was incredible. The entitlement was ridiculous. Her behavior grew more aggressive as months passed. The will was absolutely evident, yet she behaved as though it did not exist. I discovered Isabella had changed the locks when I got home one night. Yes, regarding the locks, on a house under legally my ownership. Before someone at last let me in, I had to pound on the door for what seemed like eternity. She was throwing yet another dinner party as I walked inside. She hardly looked up, behaving as though I were the invader in my own house. I approached her after everyone departed. Though I attempted to keep cool, I became enraged. She really advised me to move out, brushing it off as not really important. She said my lifestyle didn't fit the house and her friends and events were a better fit. The next morning, I contacted our family lawyer. I felt this issue was about to get more severe. Hence, I wanted to make sure everything was in order. The attorney informed me Isabella had no claim to the house and it was legally mine. If things didn't get better, he even advised I start eviction processes. I didn't want it to come to that. Therefore, I tried one more time to persuade her. I gave her a compromise. She could either find her own place or start helping with family bills. She giggled in front of me. She screamed, "I'm not about to pay rent for my own house," and I gave her an ultimatum. Either pay up or get out. She bolted, screaming that she was done with me. Though I should have known better, I considered that might be the end of it. Her lawyer sent me a note the following day. Declaring she was entitled to half the house, she was threatening to bring me before court. She had no case, so I knew, but the boldness of it all startled me. At that point, I realized I had to strike back. I began recording everything. Her parties, her messes, the house she altered. Should this go before court, I wanted to be ready. Things spun rapidly. Reaching out to family members and mutual friends to present herself as the victim, Isabella launched a full-fledged smear campaign. She said I was mercilessly throwing her out while she struggled financially, saying I was selfish and unappreciative of everything she had done for me, which was ridiculous since she hadn't done it. She painted me out as a monster. Relatives started calling me, demanding to know why I was being so nasty. They charged me with deserting my own sister. For everyone who would listen, I presented my side of things. Yet, Isabella's manipulation ran deep. Nobody knew what to believe as she told several versions of the tale to different persons. While some felt I had misled her out of inheritance, others felt I was unfairly evicting her. Though under pressure, I stayed true. It was taxing. A few friends and family saw through her lies and contacted her to offer their encouragement. Though it didn't make things any simpler, everyone could see what she was doing. Eventually, my lawyer applied for official eviction. It wasn't what I wanted, but I couldn't keep living this way. Isabella answered by acting outlier at home. She kept the house messy, blasted loud music all day, and threw even more parties. She seemed to be pushing me toward reaction, but I turned away the bait. One night, out of the blue, Isabella made me an offer. I recorded everything and stayed concentrated on the eviction procedure. She would go permanently if I handed her a large sum of money. She did not deserve a dime. Hence, it was absurd, but it also revealed how desperate she was getting. I turned down, and that's when she intensified her slander campaign even more. This was only the start of what would turn out to be the most taxing and frustrating fight of my life. After turning down Isabella's absurd financial demand, things descended more rapidly. She was going all in, not merely double down. Her next action was starting a social media campaign portraying herself as the victim of my claimed mistreatment. She portrayed a sad, struggling sister to perfection and wrote dramatic updates on how I was forcing her onto the streets and how she had nowhere to go. The comments were a nightmare. Those who knew the true narrative were devouring it, showered her with pity, provided lodging, and even proposed they aid her financially. The hardest thing was that some acquaintances, even extended relatives we both knew, were beginning to turn against me. It was infuriating. I would get disapproving looks when I ran across them, and a few straight accused me of being callous. My attorney had counseled me to keep quiet and stay away from public events. Engaging just would make things worse. Though I wanted to call her out online, I understood the danger involved was not worth it. I remained quiet and concentrated on what I could control, getting ready for court. About this time, Troy, an old friend of ours, sent us an unexpected note. Years ago, he dated Isabella. We hadn't communicated in a long time, so I wasn't expecting to hear from him. Isabella was probably going to play dirty in court, he warned me, having been observing the circumstances from a distance. She's done this kind of thing before, he said. She is adept at altering the story to suit her appearance as innocent. Be ready for anything. Hearing that was both a comfort and a caution. Knowing someone else saw through her was encouraging, but it also made me realize how far she might go to win. At home, Isabella's behavior deteriorated. She left trash and unwashed dishes all about, started playing music at all hours of the night, and threw even larger parties. She seemed to be challenging me to grab, to act with something she could use against me. I steered clear of the bait. Rather, I kept everything under documentation. I kept a notebook documenting her behavior, pictures of the clutter, and movies of the noise problems. My attorney told me this would bolster my case. Then, all of a sudden, she moved boldly once more. Once more, one night, I returned home to discover the place teeming with people I knew not at all. But the circumstances had something more sinister about this time. She obviously had no intention of going without a fight. I heard her telling her pals how she was about to win big and finally get what she deserved. A few days later, I came across something that validated my assumptions. Since Isabella never cleaned after her parties, I was cleaning in the living room and observed something strange next to the bookshelves. At first, I thought I was seeing things. However, when I looked closer, I saw what she was doing. A little hidden camera positioned to catch the whole room. Presumably trying to capture me doing or saying something she could use against me in court, Isabella had set up the camera to record our interactions. I immediately turned off the camera and called my attorney. We captured everything: pictures, timestamps, even the camera itself. Although disgusted, my attorney was not shocked. "This simply helps to support your case," he said. "She is ready to go to great lengths to control the circumstances." I avoided confronting her about the camera. Letting her think gave me the advantage. Meanwhile, Isabella's social circle was beginning to fall apart. One of her best pals, Mara, contacted me. Instead of bracing for additional charges, Mara acknowledged she didn't believe Isabella's account of events. Honestly, a lot of us are starting to see through her, she added. She has been sharing such a variety of tales that none of them make sense now. People are pulling back. It was a little triumph, but gave me hope. As the court date drew near, I discovered more about Isabella's financial predicament. If her friends were beginning to catch on, perhaps others too. After some investigation, I found she was in even worse shape than I had assumed. She was avoiding creditors left and right, maxed up many credit cards, and months overdue on rent at her former apartment. She had moved in with me out of convenience. She had done it because she had nowhere else to go. It was irritating to find how much she had controlled me from the beginning. She knew she was sinking, and instead of owning it, she would have dragged me into her mess. The day of the eviction hearing at last arrived. Looking arrogant and assured, Isabella entered the courtroom carrying her attorney. She kept staring at her phone, probably updating her buddies on the developments. I remained silent and trusted my attorney to handle all. The judge ran over the paperwork fast. We had all the proof: the will, documents of ownership, records of my repairs, and evidence of Isabella's actions. They ruled in my favor not too long ago. Isabella was shocked since the house was legally hers, and the judge approved an eviction notice giving her 30 days to vacate. She had a complete collapse just outside the courtroom as we were leaving. She yelled at me, accusing me of ruining her life and asserting I always have been jealous of her. She said karma would visit me, but I ignored her. Though the judge had decided in my favor, I knew Isabella would not depart silently. There was nothing more to say. Sure enough, only 1 week later she tried one last act. She had 30 days to move out, and I sensed she would make those 30 days as challenging as possible. She started to behave as like nothing was wrong, cooked supper, tidying the house, and suddenly became shockingly courteous. It was so unlike her that it drew attention right away. When Mara messaged me, my suspicions were validated. "Just so you know," she said, "Isabella has been telling folks she is developing one last plot to get her way. Though I had no idea what Isabella's aim was, I was not ready to let my defenses down. 2 weeks left before she had to go, so I prepared for whatever she intended to do. Some of the most tense and bizarre days of my life were the 2 weeks before Isabella's eviction. Her behavior took an even more odd turn following her little spell of playing house, cooking, cleaning, and acting remarkably nice. One day I got home from work to find her seated in the living room with a stack of documents spread out on the coffee table. She seemed to know the clock was running out and was attempting a final stunt to save face or buy herself more time. She started, "You know, there's a case to be made that this house should have been split evenly." She had this smug look on her face like she'd just cracked the code to some master plan. "Basically, you did not earn it. Mom and Dad handed it to you. I believe we both know it wasn't fair." I didn't even blink. "Isabella, we have gone through this." The judge basically decided to my advantage. The will was apparent. She shrugged and slanted back in the chair without claiming anything about the house. That evening, I double-checked all the locks and began keeping my more valuable records, such as the house deed and my legal documentation, out of her reach. I was not going to let her use any last-minute gimmicks. I also searched the rest of the house looking for any other covert cameras or recording equipment. But fortunately, I came nowhere. Still, the paranoia wore you out. Every minute I spent at home felt like walking on eggshells, waiting for Isabella's next action. 3 days before her eviction date was the breaking point. When I got home, the house was utterly wrecked. Torn-up pictures of our parents were strewn over the floor, furniture was overturned, and graffiti was sprayed on the walls. She clearly had it in mind, a last act of retribution for losing the house. I stood in the doorway for a moment, allowing the fury and incredulity to flood over me. I then reached for my phone and began compiling everything. To accurately depict the degree of the damage, I shot pictures and videos of it from all sides. I was not going to let her get away with this. When I confronted her the following day, she merely laughed. "Lyle, What do you have planned? Sue me for losses? Now go forward. Put it on your list of little triumphs. Her lack of regret was amazing. You do not understand, do you? I said, this has nothing to do with winning. It's about your owning your actions. She rolled her eyes and turned away, muttering something about how I would regret this. You have been walking all over people your entire life, and now you are finally paying for it. I was done letting her words get to me. I couldn't tell if it was a threat or just more of her empty bravado. The day the eviction finally arrived. Just to be safe, I had paid a locksmith to visit and change the locks as soon as Isabella left. Quietly packing what little she had left, she hauled suitcases to her car. She surprised me by not trying to set a scene, but I didn't trust the peace. Not the end of it. It felt like the eye of the storm. I had the locks changed and began tidying the mess she had left behind shortly after she left. In a sense, it was cathartic, cleansing the walls of graffiti, tossing aside broken furniture, and recovering my space. The house felt like mine once more for the first time in months, but naturally, Isabella was not done. 1 week later, I got a letter from a debt collection agency alleging I co-signed a large personal loan Isabella had taken out years ago. I started to rage. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who started working right away to clear my name. I had not co-signed anything for her and had no idea how she had gotten my name linked to the loan. It didn't take long to show that I had no link to the loan, but the entire process served as another reminder of how far Isabella was ready to go to bring me down with her. As word of Isabella's circumstances was getting out, former friend Mara kept me informed about events in Isabella's social circle. She's burned so many bridges, Mara said one day. People are finally seeing her for who she really is. Apparently, several of Isabella's friends had stopped talking to her altogether after learning the truth about her behavior. Some had even come forward with personal tales of how she had exploited or controlled them for financial gain. A few weeks later, I learned via the grapevine that Isabella had filed for bankruptcy. Her once glamorous way of life was disintegrating, and she had no idea how to stop. She was living in a small, run-down apartment far from the high-end life she used to flaunt and had lost her job, probably because of her erratic behavior there too. Though largely I felt relief, part of me felt sympathy for her. She had spent so long ruining my life, and now karma was finally catching up with her. I could breathe once more for the first time in what felt like eternity. The home was silent, and I could stop worrying about Isabella turning up at my door carrying some fresh idea. I began working on fixing the damage she had done to the house and myself, but just as I believed it was at last over, I received one last letter from Isabella. It was an apology, at least on paper. She said she had struck rock bottom and wanted to atone. She asked if we could start fresh and heal our relationship. I ignored her. With Isabella, I had finished my lesson. Every olive branch she extended had strings attached, and I was not going to let that trap trip me once more. I sent the letter to my attorney, who encouraged me to keep my distance and move on. That is precisely what I intended to do. I realized it was time to totally cut ties after Isabella's eviction and her half-hearted attempt at reconciliation. Days passed on my kitchen counter before I eventually tossed her letter away. I knew her remarks were empty without having to go back over them. I banned her number, her email, and every conceivable way she could get in touch with me. She was apologizing because she had run out of people to control. She was not expressing regret. I went absolutely without communication with her for the first time in my life. It was disturbing as well as freeing. Isabella had been a continual storm in my life. Now that the storm had passed, I wasn't sure what to do with the stillness. I pushed myself into house restoration. She left behind a lot of physical damage, broken furniture, a wrecked living room, and other little items she had wrecked in her fury. Organizing things turned into my therapy. I rebuilt the walls, replaced the damaged furnishings, and reorganized the area to once again feel like home. Though the house didn't seem the same, with every brushstroke and every fresh piece of decor, I felt like I was recovering my life. No matter how much I fixed, the recollections of what had happened there persisted in being impossible to ignore. Every room weighed the turmoil Isabella had brought about. Family conflicts did not help, it was a continual reminder of the worst year of my life. Although some relatives knew my side of the story, others, especially those who had always liked Isabella, refused to see her for who she truly was. They hung on the version of events she had presented, depicting me as the villain who would have thrown her sister onto the streets. It made little difference whether the court decided in my favor or if Isabella left a path of damage behind her. I was still the evil man to them. The saddest thing was losing relationships with people I loved. Once in my life, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I knew, were now far away, choosing to trust Isabella's lies above the truth. It wounded more than I would have wanted to admit. I reminded myself, though, that the ones who really counted would be right by me. And they did. One of those people was Rowan, an old buddy who had turned into my rock through this disaster. Years of knowing each other had passed, yet after high school we had drifted apart. Rowan contacted me after I began sharing information on social media on the turmoil with Isabella. It originally served only as a check-in to see if I was okay, but our chats grew longer and more regular, and before I knew it, Rowan was everything Isabella lacked: kind, encouraging, and real. Being around them reminded me that not everyone in my life was out to exploit me. It felt like a breath of fresh air. Our friendship evolved over time, and for the first time in a long time, I felt positive about the future. Just as I was beginning to reconstruct my life, Isabella's anarchy crept back in. A few weeks following her eviction, I got still another letter, this one from a lawyer. Isabella was once more contesting the will. It was ridiculous since her new allegation was that our parents had forced her to sign some papers, therefore rendering the will useless. She had no proof, and I had all I needed to show the will was valid. Still, it meant more time spent cleaning her mess and additional legal hassles. My attorney managed it quickly. We showed the actual will together with signed, notarized comments from the attorney who created it. The court rejected Isabella's unfounded assertions without second thought. It was another effort at creating drama, but it came short. This time I hardly bothered facing her. While I was finishing off her needs for my attention, Isabella's life was still disintegrating. Though I never asked, Mara kept me informed on the rumors from Isabella's social circle. Most of Isabella's friends, according to Mara, had severed relationships with her upon discovering her machinations. Her landlord had kicked her out of her new apartment for unpaid rent, and she had lost her job after consistently turning up late or not at all. It was a sad, natural slide from there. Living over her means for years, Isabella had turned to lies and deception for survival. Part of me felt guilty for her, though, as burning every bridge finally leaves one standing alone. Shielded from the results of her activities, she had been the golden child her entire life. She struggled, though, when reality set in. Still, I found it impossible to let her decisions occupy me. One day Rowan brought up something I hadn't thought of before: selling the house. After enough of my life cleaning up messes, I wasn't about to do it again. The concept first felt quite intense. The house my parents had left me was the one I had grown up in. But Rowan noted that the house also harbored a lot of negative memories. It had come to represent all the suffering and anarchy Isabella had brought about. "The house doesn't define your connection to your parents," Rowan replied. The more I thought about it, the more the idea made sense. They left it to you because they loved you, not because they wanted you to be bound to it forever. Selling the house seemed like a means of really moving on, of bidding the past behind and beginning over. Though I wasn't sure whether I was ready to let go just yet, I was open to the prospect as I rebuilt my life, and Isabella vanished even further into the background. She stopped getting in touch and even vanished from social media. Mara informed me she most likely started again in a tiny town some distance away. I asked for nothing except general information. For the first time in a long time, my life was calm. As far as I could tell, the less I knew about her, the better. The house was quiet, my connection with Rowan was developing, and I felt as though I was at last starting to manage my future. Still, there was a part of me that recognized the house would always hold historical weight, regardless of how much I fixed it. Time came to determine if I could live with that, or whether it was time to let it go. I battled the concept of selling the house for several weeks. Part of me hung to the memories it carried. The laughing in the kitchen during family dinners, the peaceful afternoons on the veranda with my parents, the small pleasures reminding me of better days. But I was dragged back to the turmoil Isabella had created every time I entered the living room and saw the faint imprint of the graffiti she had sprayed on the walls. That cannot be undone by scrubbing or painting. Rowan was gentle and never pushed me to decide. Still, their recommendations stayed in my head. The house was indeed only a construction. My relationship to my parents has nothing to do with preserving it. Just as I was beginning to tilt towards selling, life tossed one last Isabella-shaped curveball my way. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that holding on to the house felt less like honoring their legacy and more like holding on to the weight of all that had transpired. Again, I answered a call from a debt collector. This time, it concerned another loan Mom had taken out years before our parents died. Unbelievably, my name had wound up on the document as a co-signer. Not even co-signed a loan. I had signed nothing for her. Furious, I passed everything to my attorney, who promptly closed it down. The collector withdrew within days. The papers were obviously fake. That phone call was the last push I needed. But because though Isabella was out of my life, her mistakes somehow found me. That evening I gave Rowan a call, telling them I was ready to sell. The process of listing the house on the market was liberating as well as emotional. Sifting through my parents' possessions, I couldn't help but linger over vintage pictures, trinkets, and treasures, revisiting the joyful memories buried all over the house. Though it was mixed, it also brought me closure. Knowing that my parents would have wanted their possessions to bring someone else happiness, I packed the items that most meant to me and donated the rest. When the house at last went on the market, I experienced a weird mix of grief and relief. As the house sale went on, I received one last note from Isabella. It was like releasing a weight you have been carrying for so long. Your shoulders felt lighter, but you're not sure what to do with it. Claiming to have changed, she contacted a mutual friend wanting to reconnect. She wanted to mend our relationship and said she had learned from her mistakes. Though I knew better, the friend persuaded me to give her a chance, since Isabella's remarks were usually expertly written to draw people in and create the belief she was real. But I had seen her actual hues far too many times to fall for it once. Her apologies were really a means of testing the waters, a technique to see whether she might control her return into my life. For the first time, I didn't feel bad about cutting her off. I gently informed the mutual friend I wasn't interested in. I simply didn't care. I was not resentful or furious anymore. The house sold faster than I had anticipated. She was no longer a part of my life, and I meant to keep it that way. Purchased by a young couple eager to make it their own, I surprisingly felt calm when I turned over the keys. Though it had been the heritage of my family, this mansion had also caused great suffering. Letting it go felt like shedding old skin, allowing way for something new. Rowan and I began looking for a place together. We discovered a comfortable house in a peaceful area. Nothing ostentatious, but just right for us. Entering that space seemed to be a fresh start in all respects. Old memories or the ghosts of the past did not hold it down. With Isabella out of my life and the house behind me, I felt like I could at last breathe. It was ours, and that made all the difference. Months of relentless anxiousness that had dogged me started to recede. I began concentrating on my relationship with Rowan, my job, and mending ties with the family members who had been by me through it all. Though I missed them, the people who had sided with Isabella slipped away. One evening, when Rowan and I were sorting boxes in our new house, they handed me a picture of my parents that I had almost forgotten about. Loyalty wasn't always unqualified, and that was fine. It showed them seated on the porch, grinning at one another, as though they had no care in the world. Life isn't perfect anymore. It never is, but it's nice. I put the picture on the mantel, and for the first time in a long time, felt like I was honoring their memory the proper way, not by clinging to the house, but by establishing a life they would have been proud of. The disorder has calmed down, the scars are healed, and at last I am at peace with how things turned out. Selling the property meant more than just getting on from Isabella. It was about recovering my life and letting go of the things weighing me down. And it feels like mine once more, first of all in years. Life began to feel normal once I sold the house and moved in with Rowan. At first, waking up in a house devoid of historical weight seemed unusual. Rowan and I spent our first few months in the new house making it our own and came to see just how much lighter I felt, how much space I now had to concentrate on myself and the things that were really important. Together, we selected colors for the walls that suited us, adorned the area with items that spoke to our individual tastes, and loaded the place with memories of our own lives. It was the reverse of the anarchy I had lived with Isabella. In the weeks following relocation, I heard fragments about Isabella from mutual friends. For once, my house felt like a haven rather than a battlefield. She apparently was trying to start over after moving to a tiny, forgettable town. Part of me questioned whether she truly had changed, if reaching rock bottom had finally compelled her to consider her behavior. Her social media accounts had gone dark, and even the family members who had once supported her seemed to know nothing about what she was up to. But I rapidly dismissed those ideas. It made no difference anymore. Her path was no longer of interest to me, regardless of her transformation or lack thereof. Enough of my life had gone into trying to reconcile with someone who lived for anarchy. My sole concern now was maintaining my personal serenity. One day, while sorting the final few boxes, I came upon a photo album I had stolen from the family house before to sell. Pictures of my parents, my early years, and even a couple of Isabella and me abound there before all went wrong. Turning those pages was a mixed bag. I opted to retain the album not as a means of dwelling on the past, but rather as a reminder of the good that existed before everything got so chaotic. There were nice events in there, camping trips, family dinners, birthdays, but they felt like they belonged to another lifetime. As time went on, I began to restore my ties with the family members who had helped me through the crisis, independent from the person Isabella had evolved. Having been my lighthouse amid the tempest, I wanted to show them how much I valued their allegiance. Just a small handful of us started having regular family meals, and it felt like a return to the warmth and connection I had always loved. The relatives who had sided with Isabella, they remained far off. Knowing they had believed her falsehoods first hurt, but finally, I came to accept it. I came to see that moving ahead required not their approval. Enough were the folks who really understood me and supported me one evening as Rowan and I watched the sun set beyond the horizon on the porch of our new house. The silence was broken with the sound of crickets. The air was cold. Turning to me, Rowan asked, "Do you regret anything? With Isabella, the house, all of it?" Before responding, I gave it some thought. "No," I responded. "I have no regrets about defending myself. I have nothing to repent of leaving the house, and I have nothing to repent of excluding her from my life. Though difficult, it had to happen." Rowan grinned and reached for my hand, for my peace, too. "Lyle, you have progressed a great distance. I hoped you knew that." The encounter with Isabella surprised me more than I could have imagined. For the first time in years, it helped me to see the value of establishing limits, of being strong even when it seems impossible, of picking oneself when others try to knock you down. Though it was not a simple lesson, I will take it with me always. Months became a year, and the turmoil of the past seemed increasingly far off. Unlike the maelstrom I'd gone through with Isabella, Rowan and I started creating a life anchored in trust, respect, and tranquility. One day we began discussing future plans like vacation, puppy adoption, and perhaps even creating our own family one day. The house we shared came to represent everything I had battled: peace, stability, and a fresh start, for the first time in what felt like eternity. I made peace with it since I knew what the future holds for Isabella. It was not the house my parents left me, but the one I had selected for myself. Thus, it is more significant. It is no longer my job to straighten her whether she finds her way or keeps along the same road. Taking care of myself and the people who really care about me is my responsibility. It strikes me as I sit here writing this, how far I have come. From a family turmoil and betrayal dream, what began as such turned out to be among the most transforming events of my life. I have dropped the guilt, the bitterness, and the wrath. Here's to fresh starts, Reddit. What's left is a great sense of thankfulness for Rowan, the family and friends that stood with me, and the opportunity to start afresh. Right now, I am behind the house, the drama, and Isabella. I am building my life. It is mine and only mine. I have never felt more free. Thank you for following my path. More than I could explain, your encouragement and guidance during this road has meant. Take care. Remember, sometimes the greatest way to forward is to let go. I am shutting this chapter for good now, and am looking forward to what comes next.